Today we are excited to have a very special guest with us, James Tyberonn. James worked as a professional engineer and geologist for 33 years. As a geologist, he had the opportunity to study the Earth on every continent. He has lived and worked abroad for those 33 years, circumnavigating the globe many times and traveling to over 85 countries in his work. He has always had a very deep love for the earth and a driven interest in spirituality and metaphysics. During his years of working abroad, he devoted himself to intense metaphysical studies of various disciplines and has focused on understanding the energy of the living earth. He is considered to be one of the world's most knowledgeable experts on earth energies, sacred sites, grids, ley lines, portals, vortexes, healing gems, crystals, auric maintenance, EMF, light body, and spiritual growth. And his goal has been to merge the scientific with the spiritual, forming the integral circle. James is a member of the Sierra Club and a staunch environmentalist. He has a great love for the planet and believes the earth to be the living sentience of Gaia. He has visited over 300 sacred sites across the globe over the past 4 decades. He has been a guest speaker at the Elders Speak Conference in Sedona, Arizona, and the 2011 Eagle and Condor Elders Gathering in Peru. James has hosted many conferences and has been a guest on numerous metaphysical radio programs. He has also recently been to the United Nations seat in New York as the featured speaker to the UN seat. He has had numerous shamanic journeys in Mexico and South America and earned initiations in 7 vision quests and multiple shamanic journeys. He has authored 4 books, co-written a 5th with Lee Carroll and Tom Kenyon, and is writing his 6th book on the metaphysical healing properties of gemstones. Welcome, James Tyberonn, to the show. We are so excited to have you as our guest here today on The Living Universe. And welcome, Nancy Hummingbird, our wonderful co-host.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's a real honor to be here, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Well, it's an absolute pleasure. I'm so excited to have you on the show today. We both are, James. And very much of my work over the last few years with the grids and ley lines of the planet has been inspired by your work and has been confirmed by so many of the messages that you're bringing through from Metatron. So if we could just jump in first of all and get you to explain a little bit about what exactly it is that you're doing for the listeners that maybe aren't quite familiar with the work of the grids and the ley lines and the portals, etc.
Well, we feel that that the Earth is a living, conscious sentience, and that there are energies on the Earth that are being refashioned, that are being reactivated in what Metatron refers to as year 2 of the new Earth. So many people thought that the ascension of humanity occurred on, the equinox or the solstice of 2012. And what Metatron has always said, that was the upshift of the Earth. He defined the planetary ascension as an expansion of the Earth into 12 dimensions. And there are a lot of factors that are scientifically based that I've discussed with people like Graham Hancock, John Van Auken, and have studied the work of Bill Buehler, and we feel that the coronal mass ejections, the solar winds, the solar flares that have bombarded the planet for the past 20 years, and there have been, in fact, more X-class solar flares, more X-class coronal mass ejections in the past 2 decades than any other time since they were recorded. And what these have done is to change the anionic background of the Earth. And it's interesting because Dr. Bernice Barlow wrote a book entitled Sacred Sites of the West about 15 years ago. And she referenced a study, a university-endorsed study of the way that the ion ratio of the Earth affects the human consciousness. And the normal resonance of positive ions to negative ions, and a positive ion is called a cation, and a negative is called an anon. The normal shift, the normal ratio, I should say, of cations to anions is something like 3 to 5. And in this study, they determined that when the cationic ratio was shifted to 6 to 1, that humans began to have what they referred to as hallucinations. They began to have out-of-body experiences. And so the way that Bernice talked about this is that there are sacred sites that have always been recognized by the indigenous people, by the ancestral societies, not just the Native Americans, but the Native people all across the earth, from in Africa, in Australia, in all of the regions. And that many of the holy places, many of the sacred sites, had natural mineralogical structures that created this 6 to 1 ratio. And so that is why the indigenous people, the people that were connected to the living consciousness of the earth, were drawn to these places. And in these natural mineralogical fields with that shifted ratio, they had their visions. They found that it was easier, as the test in California at the university suggested, that when that 6 to 1 ratio occurs, the pineal gland is open. That's not the university conclusion. That is my own. Their conclusion, in fact, and this is kind of funny and standard for the mainstream of academia, but their conclusion was that out-of-body experiences, mystical experiences, and the abduction scenario was all a hallucination due to the electromagnetic induction with the human nervous system. I, on the other hand, believe that what is happening here is that ratio does a shift that activates the pineal gland and puts us through that gateway. And it's amazing, and it is a confirmation that the indigenous societies, the Native Americans, recognized this, that they were told by the spirits of the living earth that if they go to a certain location, their vision quest would be more enhanced. And in fact, certain of these areas, like the ones that occur in Sedona, Arizona, were meant primarily for vision quest, not for people to reside and stay in all the time, because these essentially become portals. These essentially become stargates. I had the opportunity to do an interview with Zuni elder Clifford Mahudi a few days ago, and I met Clifford last year, in fact, in Arizona, when we were both being interviewed for a special television series regarding national parks, and this one was about the Grand Canyon. And so we were both being interviewed by the Travel Channel, and his interview fascinated me, and so we became friends, and he began speaking at some of our events and gatherings. And so it is interesting then that the normal ratio of anions to cations began shifting with the X-class solar flares. With all of the coronal mass ejections, there have been billions and billions and billions of tons of anionic energies that have been bombarding the Earth. And so what the result is that there is now, and this is provable in science, this is provable through the NASA website, there are jet streams, there are permanent movement streams streams of anionic energies that are circulating the Earth now that can be tracked and were not there before. So I believe that this is the mechanism for the shift of the Earth. It is true, to paraphrase the words of Graham Hancock, that we are a society who have encouraged the beta state, the beta alpha states of consciousness, of alert consciousness, and that we have disregarded the theta states of consciousness, the dream states. Our society almost discourages a person to be a dreamer, whereas ancient societies recognize that when we enter these other states of consciousness, we tune into a greater frequency, a greater landscape, a greater horizon of dimensional realities. And it is truly in the theta state of consciousness that we are able now to join together and co-create the reality of the new Earth. So many people have said, you know, what happened in 2012? I don't see any change. Well, what we suggest is that the planet shifted to a new matrix, to an expanded energy field in 2012 through mechanisms such as the coronal mass ejections that absolutely changed the ionic ratio of the planet, that allows us now to more effectively go into higher states of consciousness. And when we go into higher states of consciousness through the pineal activation, it is then that we are able to rise above the third dimension and work in non-polarity fields in which we are able to access more effectively our true identity, our true nature, and communicate with a far greater source of consciousness, and that includes our own higher self.
Wow, what a fabulous explanation you have brought forth for us. And it's so empowering because people are experiencing this, they're feeling it because it's truly happening. And it is our rational mind that brings forth doubt, that questions these experiences, because like you say, we become so disconnected from those different brainwave states, the dreamlight states, and we question them. We're actually uncomfortable with them because we become so removed from them. The explanation that you have just brought forth and the science that you bring to it helps people to have that left brain information they need to then flow into this process and say, okay, my left brain gets it. Now I'm willing to go a little bit further into this. That makes perfect sense what you shared. So thank you for that incredibly powerful introduction. And it really, what you're showing us is this is a cosmological process that's going on, and it's occurring all around us and with us. And this is why the Hopi prophecy said, push off from the edge of the shore. Because if we allow ourselves to be in the flow with this, it's truly a miraculous journey. So I'm really grateful for the introduction. And Clifford Mahudi also is a special man in my life. James, I was honored to drive with Clifford to Zuni Nation recently, and he invited me to stay for the Blue Kachina ceremony. And when we got there, the guidance told me, no, I had been brought there to work the grids and ley lines, and that I was not going to be staying for 3 days waiting for the Blue Kachina ceremony, that I needed to work the grids and ley lines of the area. So that's a nice tie-in with Clifford. Thank you.
Well, he is he's an absolutely amazing man, and he's a man of courage. And he's a man that walks in two worlds, because about 15 years ago, and I lived most of my life, Lynn and Nancy, I lived most of my life as a foreigner, so I'm not a typical quote-unquote American. I left the United States in 1977, and I worked abroad for 33 years, always as a foreigner. And I lived in South America for 9 years. I lived in Africa for 6 years. I lived in India, Russia, all of these interesting places that allowed me expand my horizons. And they also allowed me a unique format to study metaphysics. I tell people that I grew up in the crystal vortex of Arkansas as a devout Baptist, and I came back 30 years later with a completely different mindset, and caused a lot of concern among my family, who still pray for me. But I was able to expand my belief on the nature of reality, particularly in Brazil, and it was originally through the works of Edgar Casey, and but I found myself in a unique situation where I was never in an English-speaking country, and so I didn't watch television. I had a metaphysical awakening on the banks of the Amazon River in 1978 when a man from Germany gave me a copy of the biography of Edgar Casey, There Is a River, written by Thomas Suger. And it answered all the questions that Christianity in its orthodox expression did not. And it expressed it in a way that I could relate to, because Edgar Casey was also a Christian, and so when these concepts in his readings of reincarnation, of karma, of all of these interesting aspects about past lives came through, he had initial doubts, as did I. And so I read that book cover to cover on the banks of the Amazon River, and it absolutely put me on fire. For the next 30 years, I read every metaphysical book I could get my hands on. I was in retrospect, I had put myself in a setup where it was easy to do that study because the television in most of these countries was not appealing to me, and so I read metaphysics and I studied it, and I had these experiences in a situation where there was not a peer pressure, where there was not a cultural dogma that kept me from experiencing these things. And being a geologist, I always had a tremendous interest in the living earth. And so what I was allowed to learn by being a expatriate, by being a foreigner, and not necessarily speaking the language when I first got into these countries, is that I learned out of necessity to communicate non-verbally with people. Part of my experience has always been that I look like an American. And that's not always a good thing when you're outside the United States. And so I was in certain situations where I needed to determine if this taxi driver was going to be okay to take me to where I was going, or if he had ulterior motives. So I learned how to look at people and read them. And I experienced 3 coups d'etats when I lived in Africa. In fact, my family and I were rescued by the French Foreign Legion in 1990 when a coup d'etat occurred in the country of Gabon in Africa. And so we experienced situations where we needed to rely on nonverbal communications, and what that did was open the pineal glands, of course. And so I learned how to experience these things from that perspective. And so my studies in metaphysics grew, and I was in the situation where my job allowed me to go to sacred sites, to go to power nodes, and I tried to understand them, not simply from a metaphysical standpoint, but to look for the forgotten science behind them. And people like Bernice Barlow, people like Greg Braden, people like Dr. Louise Montaigne, have done tremendous amounts of work in explaining how mineralogies, how certain geologies are the driving forces and are the mechanisms of the sentience of the living earth in terms of its nervous system, which is, of course, the ley lines, and portals, which could be considered like meridians. And so I went over these 30 years of being an expatriate, I had the opportunity to circumnavigate the globe many times. And it was a lonely existence and very hard in many ways. It's hard to, be a foreigner. And eventually I did learn to speak the languages. I speak French, Spanish, and Portuguese, not because I studied it, but because I had no choice. And so those were interesting experiences. And I began to understand a little bit more about how the geology of certain sacred sites influences the nature of this system, and so that's what I wrote about in my first book, where I focus on the energy of sacred sites and the geometry. This is where Bill Bueller came in and became a teacher for me. I studied the Rochelle grid systems under Bill. At one point, I think I printed. He's just a wealth of information, and we're speaking about William Bueller, who now resides in Crestone, Colorado. But at one point, I think I had over 250 emails of his teachings that I printed out and was able to put in a file that I studied. And his work is brilliant. It's hard to read sometimes, but I studied it, and I began to try to learn about the Rochelle grids and all of the systems that set up. So it's always been fascinating to me because I used to hear people speaking about ley lines and speaking about portals, and I would hear different people say, well, there's a portal in your backyard, or there's a ley line going through your house, and I knew there was more to it than that. There has to be a scientific basis. So my theory that absolutely, in my mind, confirms the energy structures that are here is that the Earth, in essence, has on its surface a floating ocean of electrical energies of a very high spectrum, and that these energies, in a sense, if you imagine them floating, think of them as an ocean. There is an ocean of energy floating on the surface of the Earth. Now, the Earth, and this is science, emits a negative charge, and I don't like to use the word negative and positive. We'll refer to it as an anionic charge. And the Earth emits an anionic field that goes all the way up to the stratosphere, which occurs at about 30,000 feet, roughly. And that space between the surface of the Earth and 30,000 feet above the Earth is essentially a capacitor, meaning that it holds an electrical charge. And so this field that surrounds the Earth is where all of our lightning comes from, and it is referred to as the Schumann resonance. And interestingly, it has a electrical charge of 7.85 hertz, or did before the Ascension, and that is also the same Hertzian measurement as the human brainwave of the Thadian field. And so inside this capacitor that surrounds the surface of the Earth, all of that ocean of energy that sits on the surface of the Earth becomes dynamic. And so by dynamic, I mean it doesn't sit there in a static way. It's not like a pond with no movement. It begins to develop currents. It is dynamic. And so this field of energy flows into little brooks that become streams that become big rivers. And so that is the natural flow. And how do these energies flow was a great part of my interest. And because they are electrical in nature, electromagnetic in nature, they're going to flow along lines of conductivity. And the conductivity comes from the different minerals on the surface and in the interior of the Earth. That makes sense. These are electrical flows, and so they're going to flow in patterns of conductivity, in copper deposits, in iron deposits, in through waters, through saline materials. And salt water is an absolutely tremendous conductor of electricity. But they also flow, particularly when they get into these big rivers, through the metallic formations, and they flow in certain patterns. And so these become what the Asians refer to as dragon lines. They become concentrated, and they reach a constant status in which there is an awareness associated to them, because we have to understand that the entire planet is alive, the entire planet is conscious. And so the ancient people, the ancestral societies, the Native Americans, the Aborigines, the tribal societies that communicated more directly with the living energies of the earth, became aware of these energies, knew where they flew, knew where they flowed, I should say, and understood the nature of these. And I think that it was the Atlanteans who mastered the science of the grids, of the ley lines, and were among the first to set up these amplifying stations in pyramidal geometries to amplify these. Dr. Samir Osmanagic has spoken at several of our conferences on the nature of pyramids and why they occur in certain locations. Richard C. Hoagland, who will be at our Arizona event, is brilliant in his theories of torsion physics and how a star tetrahedron is the format used in most planets to regulate the energies, and that's why he suggests that 19.5 latitudes are really, really key, because if you take the sphere of the Earth and put a star tetrahedron inside it, the 2 points on the above and below the equators are at 19.5 latitude. So it's a fascinating topic, and but the Earth is alive, and the shift that is occurring now is one that is meant, in my opinion, to allow us to operate more effectively above duality realms. I believe that there are 12 dimensions now available on the Earth for the first time in thousands and thousands of years. And
Yay!
this is the planetary ascensions. So I'll pause here and let you comment. I don't mean to speak nonstop. Sorry.
James, we're loving it. We're loving every minute of what you're sharing here. And Nancy, if you don't mind, if I just jump in with another question here, because we're so grateful for everything that you're bringing forward, and the science piece of it is such an essential piece, as I've mentioned, to help us bring in our left brain, our rational mind, to begin to understand what's really happening here, so that people can begin to celebrate and embrace and explore the quantum leap that our consciousnesses are being offered at this time. And certainly I'm feeling that 12-dimensional thing in my life. We are coming up to an equinox, James, and there's a lot of significance with the alignments astrologically that are coming. We have this big grand cardinal cross, a lunar eclipse in the middle of April, and you're doing a very special trip around some of those special alignments. So I'm wondering if you could tie in what's happening with the equinox and something that I've seen referred to as the harmony portal, etc., and maybe just help us understand what's occurring right now that's really significant that people might want to look further into.
Well, that's a great question, Lynn. And before I answer that, I'd just like to comment on, what you mentioned about the science. And, Metatron says that current religion omits science, and that science omits the sacred, and that what is happening now is the requisite integral circle of combining the two. And so that's why I feel really drawn to bring the science into the spiritual and the spiritual into the science. The Edgar Cayce work, really is, and I'm sure you've read Edgar Cayce. The Edgar Cayce work is really highly based in his, study of the Bible. He was very, very religious, and so it really carries, in a sense, that Christos energy. But there is an interesting quotation from the Edgar Cayce readings that I often use, and that is paraphrased, and it is an actual Cayce reading, that mankind will learn more about the nature of God through science than religion. And so that's an amazing piece of information, and is a really beautiful way to tie in both the spiritual and the scientific, because in an integral way, that's what we're doing now in the new energies. And so to refer to your question about the equinoxes, there are certain events astrologically that create apertures, that create downloads into the frame of our reality on the Earth. And the Earth is more than one phase of itself. And these equinoxes, solstices, and eclipses are very, very special. Of course, there are other astrological alignments that tie into these, but these create pockets in which energy is able to be transduced from higher dimension into the earth plane in order to upshift the frequency, upshift the energy to bring us into a higher vibration. And so the equinoxes that occur in March and September, the solstices that occur in June and December, and then the various lunar and solar eclipses that come in are mechanisms of the delivery of certain codes. And, Metatron speaks about the nature of our reality being geometric in nature. Light. We are beings of light, and light has a geometric structure. If you look at a human cell and take it down to its atomic and molecular structures, it is all sacred geometry. And so the nature of our physical reality is geometric, and the nature of our light soul essence is also geometric. And when these earth energies begin to shift through these apertures, through these portals, through these times of downloads, they have certain codes that tie in with what is happening. And so what I am told is happening in year 2 of the new Earth. 2013 was year 1 of the new Earth, the new matrix, the new 12-dimensional structure. 2014 then is year 2 of the Earth. Is that certain codes, certain frequencies are being upshifted, and this includes activations of a new chakric system, of a new light body essence. We have shifted from a magnetic grid to a crystalline grid. A magnetic grid by nature was polar. It had a north pole, it had a south pole, it had an anionic aspect and a cationic aspect, positive, negative. So 3D is still controlled in a polarity way, and that is the nature of duality. The whole, my interpretation of the whole biblical story of Adam and Eve. The Bible says that mankind came and God reached into Adam's rib and pulled out the female aspect. Well, the original phrase, the original Latin word for rib is cote, and which means side. And so basically, the human soul is neither male nor female. Our intelligence is integral. It contains the aspects of both. But when we come into the University of Earth, the duality plane, we split into a duality aspect. Every person is, in truth, neither male nor female, but both. And in duality, we experience the two, and that's what I think the Adam and Eve Garden of Eden thing is. With the experience of duality, eating the tree of knowledge. We suddenly become aware of a new existence and the Kundalini reality represented by the serpent. And so we experience duality specifically in the third dimension to learn how to be responsible creators. It is the field in which choices are available. And it is a purposed illusion to allow us to grow into our godhood, to learn how to be powerful creators. And Metatron says something very beautiful. He says that when the love of power is replaced by the power of love, humanity will make a quantum leap. And then he adds this, but love without strength is incomplete. And so, to me, that speaks volumes. We're not here simply to experience all the nuances of what's here without a purpose. We are here to learn that we are co-creators of our reality, that what we see around us, we have created. And so I believe that this upshift in 12 dimensions allows us for the first time in eons to rise above the duality level of 3D into non-duality planes of a crystalline field. And I think that the magnetic grid is being replaced by the crystalline grid, and the crystalline grid allows us to move into higher dimensions through the pineal gateway. And it is there that we will create the new earth. In fact, the role of humanity did not stop at 2012. It began at 2012. Now we have the tools in place to create a world of harmony, to create a world of peace. But it's not going to happen by itself. We have to orchestrate this. The Bible speaks of 144,000 being the number of the rapture, being a very powerful creative number. And if we, with us expanding into 12 dimensions, it is 12 squared that goes into 144,000. And I'm getting into numerology here. But this is what is happening in the new earth, that we now need to gather our masses, need to gather people to meditate together, to create a world of highest good. And if we take one look around now, we can see that, the polarity aspects of the world are in high gear. There are wars. There are rumors of wars. There is greed. There is all sorts of things happening on the planet that we need to resolve, that we need to understand. And there will always be that alpha-type personality in corporate worlds that are after control, that want the love of power rather than the power of love. And how do we deal with that? How do we face that challenge is what we are coming to now. And this is what these equinoxes, these solstices, these eclipses are coding us. It is giving us the energy activations to understand how to become co-creators through the higher dimensional field of theta, coherent consciousness. And so when we go to the portals, when we go to the places that carry these special energies that allow for multi-dimensional overlays, that allow for Rochelle grid structures to exist, we go into infinity points on the earth, and when we meditate there together, and we receive the codes and we become code carriers of this new energy, we activate the new chakra systems. In 2012, when the matrix expanded to 12 dimensions, we went beyond the early 7 chakra system to the 12 chakra system to the 33 chakra systems. And it's going to take us a few years to learn how to operate in these higher dimensions lucidly. It's going to take us a while to learn how to navigate through these higher chakras, but they're there. People are starting to see evidence now of new forms of life. There's a study being done at Duke University about what they call light sprites and elves. There's also a study in the University of Alaska, because there are light formations that are now occurring on the Earth that appear to be alive. light sprites, they call them, and some of them they're calling crabs or jellyfish. In fact, there was a crop circle in Wiltshire in England about 3 years ago of one of these. And so what that indicates is that there are multi-dimensionality is now coming into focus in the greater dimensional field, and we are beginning to see other forms of life beyond physical life, that we are starting to see the greater realities of all forms of consciousness. And these are indications that our frequency is being upshifted. We're going from old analog television to digital television. We're going to high definition. The pixels of life force on the planet are increasing, and one of the mechanisms is the solar flares, the coronal mass ejections, and the coding is being shifted in equinoxes, solstices, and eclipses.
Well, in fact, Nancy and I did an interview with Grandmother Silverstar yesterday, and she was also talking about this and talking about how at the moment of the equinox, we hit a 0 point moment. And so she was encouraging people and explaining how they can make altars and how they can intentionally tie into this 0 point moment, which then gives us access to those higher levels of information. And then the information unfolds in us over time. And much like you said, it's like we've gotten an upgrade in our own personal spaceship, our human bodies, and we're getting a whole new owner's manual to learn how to operate at this level. So it's exciting. It's a little bit of bumble and stumble, and it's such a glorious time to share in celebration together this upgrade that's occurring. So thank you for helping us to understand the significance of the equinox and solstices, because we've really become disconnected from that. And once we start to realize our connection, it empowers people. It gives people the opportunity to, in a free will universe, choose to participate and choose to tap into these opportunities for upgrades. So that's a fantastic explanation. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And you referenced 0 point there, and that's beautiful what the grandmother shared with you there. And I spoke at the Edgar Cayce Foundation with Dr. Greg Braden, a few months ago, and I had the opportunity to ask him. He was the one that first brought out the 0 point information in terms of that description of using 0 point energy. And 0 point energy, in a scientific basis, would be described as a field in which there is no electromagnetic attraction. And if you think about that, and put it into a dimensional perspective, my interpretation would be that 0 point will never exist in the third dimension, because that is a magnetic dimension. But 0 point will exist in a non-polarity field from the dimensions of 5 through 12. And so, because they are non-polarity, there is non-polarity. And so our challenge now is that as these equinoxes flow in the keys, the codes for us to shift above third dimension to learn how to navigate in the 0 point fields, that is where the co-creation of the new planet exists. There was a study by the RAND think tank in California a few years ago into a project taken on by the Maharishi University, in which they organized, and this is interesting, a certain number of people to meditate together in coherent field toward lowering the crime in specific major cities. And the RAND think tank is a very, very accredited group. They're very mainstream. And the studies that they put in place were very scientifically oriented. But this group of something like 700 people meditating toward peace, toward harmony, and it was a key factor that they did not meditate on quote-unquote lowering crime, but on raising the vibration. And that's an important distinction. But when they did that, every city had lower crime in the areas that they were meditating, the locations. And so these people were doing this coherently together. And coherency is something I'll talk about another time, but coherency is a type of light that occurs. And our sun is shifting from unconditional light to, from conditional to unconditional love, you might say. Our sun does not produce coherent energy, but it is shifting, and it is leading the way to our physical shift. And so this idea of 0 point coming in through the equinoxes is absolutely on key. It is the equinoxes and solstices in this portal of harmony that's occurring in year 2 that will lead us to the monumental year of 2038. And I'll talk about that another time. But 2038 is a very, very important milestone. It's the next step. 2012 put us into 12 dimensions. It is now our job to create peace, to create harmony coherently. It's been said many times that you'll never end war by hating war. You will only end war by loving peace. And so we have to become harmonic. We have to rise into these 0 point non-polarity dimensions, because that is where creativity occurs. And our role on the earth plane is to learn how to create responsibly, to learn how to be master creators. And in 3D, there is the duality. There is this doctor that makes house calls called cause and effect. And in this universe of duality, we see firsthand the results of what we create. And that cause and effect is, in a sense, a great teacher. It is how we learn. It is very often when we are in states of conundrum, when we are in states of great confusion, that we are forced to face our challenges and then transcend them. And so a very important point in metaphysics and spirituality is that we learn how to operate effectively in 12 dimensions. The 3D dimension is not a bad dimension. Now, from a higher plane, it is the teacher. It is the cause and effect plane. But it is through that plane that we graduate into the higher realms in which we create what comes back down, and it's a complete process. So briefly, the point is that all of us in metaphysics, all of us that are spiritual people, need to keep our feet on the ground. We need to be able to effectively work in 3D in order to go higher. We master the challenges of 3D by facing them, by dealing with them. And we deal with them in the creative state above 3D. And that is where creation occurs. Does that make sense? Am I...
Oh, yes. Nancy,
yeah.
Yes?
Oh, my gosh. You talk about the synergy of the three of us right now, and everybody that's with us, and all the thoughts and the questions become answers. How amazing of an example right here of co-creating, and I'm sure for listeners in the future, we have just co-created their answers and gave them an opportunity of what we have coming up very shortly is this amazing equinox.
And that's the thing. I mean, so many people think, well, 2012, what now? Well, 2012 wasn't the end. 2012 was the beginning. We now have the tools. We now have better tools to go into the pineal, to operate in higher dimension. And it is in higher dimension that we will co-create the new Earth. It's not going to disappear, duality. It's not meant to disappear. It's meant to be managed. And that is and that ties back to the ancient philosophy of Maya, of illusion. And that is that everything that we see here is a dream, and it is time for the dreamer to awaken. This is a purposed illusion, and we are in a format that allows us to see how what we mentally project becomes manifest into reality. And so there is not a better opportunity, a better school for gods in training to learn the responsibility of how to create beauty, how to create the science of love. And so these tools are being given to us. Everything we see is our creation. And we can either remain unconscious creators, or we can become, as we will do, conscious creators of this reality. And it is a school called the University of Earth. There is a teacher called Cause and Effect. And through meeting the challenges, not by fighting, but by detachment, yet aggressive meditation together for love, for peace, for highest good, we can learn the complex science of love that allows us to graduate into mastery. We can take the different movements, the different instrumentations called lifetimes, and we can fold them into a symphony that becomes a work of art. And that's what we're here to do. Multidimensionality is more accessible to us now because of the coronal mass ejection, because of the upshifting of the grid system, because of the diminishing of the polarity grid and the increasing of the crystalline frequency. And we can go into the science of the angelic realm, which is our true nature. And if we were to determine the nature of the angelic realm, of our highest essence in scientific terms, it would be called antimatter. If we were to look at our chakric systems in a different scientific sense, they could be considered particle accelerators that shift us from the world of physical matter, which occupies less than 7% of the known cosmos and is the exception to the rule, and it can shift us into the realm of antimatter, which is our true source, which is a world of unbelievable energy, and it is the angelic realm. Antimatter is not the opposite of matter. Matter occurs on a spectrum just like light, and at one end is antimatter, and at the other end is matter. The field of matter occupies a small part of the cosmos, but it is where duality, the university of duality, exists, and we're here to master it, and all of us will in time.
Wow, James, this has been a fascinating interview. We are so grateful for the wisdom that you have brought forth and shared with us today, and we hope that you will be joining us on some more shows to continue this conversation with us.
Well, I would love to, and would just let us know the dates, and we'll work that part out. And I would be interested in speaking a little bit about crystalline realms and about soul fracturing and soul unification through what we term as time holograms.
Oh my gosh,
we would love that.
Okay. Thank you all so very much, and it's been an honor.